People, we are going to be finishing today our wisdom series, and so let me kind of wrap it in this way. Our wisdom series has been kind of a series going through the book of Proverbs, and next week, actually, we start in our series in the book of Romans, okay? So join with us next week. We're going to launch. It's one of the more challenging books in the New Testament, just because some of the depth and breadth of the content that's there. So let me encourage you to join with us next week. That's going to take us through the Easter season as we march kind of through the many chapters and the depth of the book of Romans. But before we get there, let's conclude our series on wisdom for life. And just as a reminder, this was actually born out of the Newbie family playing the game of life. Here's what it is, in case you forgot. Back over Christmas break, you know, if you play the game of life, you spin a dial, your car moves around, you choose, do I go to college or not? And that means I get a better job or I don't. And there's a lot of the things in the game of life that don't actually match real life, okay? It's just the game version, right? You're guaranteed a job. If you go to college, you're guaranteed to get higher pay. You're guaranteed to own a house at some point. You're guaranteed to have probably multiple children, and you're guaranteed to retire. And you get to pick where you retire. And the options for whatever reason in the board game are a mansion or a farmhouse. There's like nothing in between, right? But you pick. You don't even have to roll for it. You just get to pick, right? There's a lot of things in the game that's just not true to life, and we know that. But the life we actually live isn't a game, and in fact, it's possible that you can miss things. It's possible that we can make wrong decisions, wrong turns in the paths that we take in life, or because the wrongs that people do against us kind of can really shift where life goes. How do we do this, and how do we do this well? Well, the book of Proverbs is where this comes in, because the book of Proverbs, it's geared towards God's people to teach you to be a wise person, not simply to be a person who knows some wise things, but to be a person of wisdom. And so we sent out a poll saying, what do you feel like you need wisdom in this year? And some of the top topics came back that we've covered in previous messages: singleness, marriage, seasons of change. How do I know where to go next if I'm looking at crossroads, sort of a thing? We've talked about challenging cultural conversations. How do you do that well when it feels like everything's politicized and high stakes? And we've talked about a lot of things. But I've saved one topic for the last. In fact, this was one of the highest voted of all the topics, and that's the topic of mental health. What does the Bible have to say about mental health? How do we think about that as a church community? How do I think about that as an individual? And what's my responsibility? And what does the Bible have anything to say about this? Well, the great answer is the Bible does. It actually has a lot to say about it. And so today, I thought that we would bring in a special guest. So I'd ask that you welcome my wife, Laura Newby, as she comes up here to help us out today. We're going to have a bit of fun. It's going to feel like a counselor's office, right? We're going to sit with a little mug of coffee and talk quietly like they do on NPR, you know, as you kind of tilt your head and ask, how does that make you feel? That's what most counseling is, I think. But I want to tell you why Laura's up here, besides the fact she's an amazing person. Laura and I actually met at seminary, so she does have her degree from Dallas Theological Seminary. She has a master's in biblical studies. She also has a second master's in mental health counseling, and she works here in Manhattan as a licensed mental health counselor. And Laura, why don't you just tell a little bit more about what you do and how that kind of swirls into this context?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I really am proud of you for being here. I was expecting a lot less people with the weather, so good job being here. So I work at Redeemer Counseling. I've been there for about 5 years, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor, so I see clients there in person and virtually in New York State. But I'm also a member of our training team. So one of the things that I really enjoy about my job is not just the direct counseling, but it's equipping leaders to care well for people holistically. So that's local churches will invite us to speak on different topics or to do series to train up their leaders. And my favorite part of my job is I actually manage our 9-month fellows program, which is a pastoral counseling cohort. So we go through a whole lot of topics to help leaders not only not do harm, but be able to care for people in an integrative perspective. So what does theology and the Bible have to say about these topics, and what can we learn from psychology? And it's really practical. Stuff like how to listen well and ask good questions, but it's also how do you respond if someone's feeling hopeless and suicidal? right? How do you assess for safety and know what kind of referrals to make? Lots of things like that. So that's a little bit about what I do.
So, Laura's kind enough to share some of her expertise with us today as we conclude our series on wisdom for life. So let's talk about mental health. Now, we picked out a few verses for this to kind of talk to, but the first one starts with this. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life." Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it is kind of everything else in your life is going to spring from that source. So how does this connect, and maybe just from an early foundational principle for us all here today, how does this connect with mental health?
Well, I'll say first of all, when Brian asked me to partner with him for this topic, when the survey results first came back, I was feeling a little bit intimidated. And that was before he hyped it up every single week since.
I'm her hype person.
Coming.
I'm her hype guy. I'm hyping her up. She's great.
But mental health is such a huge topic, and everyone showing up has different questions or personal experiences that feed into this. And so I will just say the things that we're focusing on here, are going to be just some principles based off of the book of Proverbs, since that's the series we're in. So we've picked some Proverbs just to highlight some really practical things. So this first one, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. I think a really good place to start is to talk about what maybe the Bible means by heart. So sometimes when we think of heart, we just think of our feelings, like our emotions. But I would argue that the way that Scripture uses heart is a little bit broader than that. It's really your inner self, right? So your thoughts, your feelings, your will, it's what motivates behavior. So the heart is like the control center of our inner person. And what I would like to say at the very foundational level is I think that mental health is a priority, and that's a biblical thing. Right? So if you've never heard from a church context before somebody say that, I think that that's a great place to start, is keep your heart with all vigilance. We have a responsibility here to shepherd our inner world, to do that in a way that is going to be biblical and holistically healthy. So we need to take it seriously. I think sometimes churches focus on behavior, right? We want obedience, we want people of faith who think rightly about God, and that really matters. But that flows from your heart. So if we want to really steward our behaviors well, I think it starts with taking our mental health seriously.
Yeah, and I love too that this is empowering in one sense, right? There is something that you can and you should be doing about this, right? This is an admonition to you. You need to keep your heart with all vigilance because everything else is going to flow out of this. So sometimes in life we go, well, I was just so impacted by others, or there's this circumstance I can't control, or someone was a bad actor. And those are all realities we need to navigate, right? Proverbs is about having the skill to navigate the demands of life as they come up. We can't always anticipate them or control them. But there is this truth that there is also a responsibility for us of something we can do. So how do we do this well? And that's part of what we're talking about today. Let's look at our next proverb. Proverbs 17:22 says this: "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones."
So our next principle is not just that mental health should be a priority, that it matters, but that our physical health and our emotional health are very connected. So when we think about mental health, I want us to think more broadly because we're such interconnected beings. The type of thoughts that we have, the health of our minds, our emotional health, our relational health, our physical health, our spiritual health, they're all interconnected. So even at a really basic level, to maybe destigmatize some stuff, have you ever felt like God was really far away and you had a hard time praying when you were sick or tired or depressed? Right? I think all these things really do impact each other. So at even the most practical level, if you want to have good mental health, how's your sleep? Right? That's a good place to start. Are you getting good sleep? Are you getting some healthy food to nourish your body? Are you exercising? Studies have shown that for mild depression, exercise is just as effective as taking an antidepressant. So what are you doing with your body to also promote your holistic health, I think is really important. The way we say it at the place I work is that we're embodied souls. And I think that that's a helpful way to maybe say that, is we really are interconnected. So if you want to foster mental health, take seriously the rest of it too.
I personally don't like sleep. I feel like it's a grandiose waste of my time. I feel like I'm giving in every night, but it does actually matter. Some of the reasons this matters, I'll just talk about some of the questions I get as a pastor. People will come, and we're going to talk about anxiety here in a little bit, but someone will say like, I feel, am I having a lack of faith? Because I believe in God, I trust in God, but my body is responding with anxiety and it feels like I can't control it. Does that mean I don't really believe what I say I believe? But we have to understand that both our inner person and our physical being are connected. Just like when you're feeling this joy and you're feeling excitement, it's actually good for your health. But the converse is true, right? When you're feeling negative, your health will decline because your inner and outer are always kind of interconnected, but they may be responding in different ways. And so there may be a situation where you're physiologically responding with anxiety, even though your heart and your mind is saying, but I'm trusting God right now. And that's true. Both can actually be true at the same time. So we need to be thoughtful about how these things are interconnected. I talked with a pastor who somebody would always say, I just feel like I can't hear from God, and I feel so down and I feel so depressed. Would you come pray with me? He said, yeah, I'll pray with you as we go walking first thing in the morning. We're going to pray together, because there's a way to understand we are built as this embodied soul. And so we want to work with both of those as we kind of pursue what holistic health looks like.
I think it's also helpful to talk just for a second about emotions in general and how I understand them, because we don't talk about that in church settings very often. So emotions really are just signals that connect us with what's happening in our lives, and they have these adaptive action tendencies. So they make us want to do something that's really helpful. We don't let emotions make every decision for us, right? But we still need to listen to them and respond well. So just a few examples are like joy is a really expansive feeling that makes you want to connect with other people. We like that one, right? Sadness is a signal that maybe there's a loss that needs to be grieved, which I will argue is best done in relationship. That connects with our next point. Grief needs a witness. Fear is a signal that maybe I need to do something to keep myself safe, right? So emotions are really, really helpful signals that we want to pay attention to. When we try to just live in our thinking brains and ignore some of those other signals, we tend to have holistic health consequences for that. So they're helpful. Listen to them and be wise with how you respond.
Let's look at the next one. Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise. How does this connect with our mental health?
So I have a 2-hour training on this, and I'm going to try to give you a couple of points. So hopefully this distills down in a way that makes sense. Mental health doesn't occur in isolation. We are created by a relational God to be relational beings, and we thrive best when we're in good, healthy relationships with other people. And the opposite is also true. The companion of fools will suffer harm. We can be hurt in relationships, and that part really matters too. Just to maybe emphasize the fact that the earlier hurts are even more impactful for us. There was a big study called the ACEs study, if you've heard of that before. ACE just stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it was a big mental health survey that asked for 10 different categories, did these things happen to you? So there's some abuse categories, some neglect categories, and then just some household dysfunction ones. And for the people who answered yes, you would get a point for each one of those adverse experiences. The higher your ACEs score, it was a direct correlation, the higher the negative health outcomes long-term for life, right? Not just in mental health categories, but very physical things too, right? Like cancer and heart disease and all kinds of things. So that was really helpful for the healthcare industry, to understand how important those early experiences are, because humans are born unfinished. Like we are born with billions of neurons that aren't wired yet. And the way that we build a brain is based off of our relational experiences, especially in those first couple years of life. So relationships are hugely helpful. They can hurt us in ways that impact us in the long term. But what I love about a follow-up on that study is they asked people this one question: did you have an adult who you trusted, who you could talk to about what was going on? And if they answered yes, those negative outcomes were cut in half. So I think the buffering influence of healthy relationships, I think the church can be a fantastic place for that, no matter what is happening for kiddos when they come into church and have these really consistent leaders who smile and light up when they see them and know their name, help them feel like they belong. That's really helpful. But really, neuroplasticity is true at any age. So if you had a really hard start, there's an impact to that on all kinds of things with holistic health. But good relationships can actually rewire a lot of that and can bring healing. So my encouragement is you need good people around you, right? Healing happens in a relationship. The other thing I wanted to say just about trauma in a really, really general way is sometimes we think about trauma being an event, and after it's done, it's done. We don't have to think about it, we don't have to talk about it, right? Like we got through it, it's done. But I think a helpful metaphor with trauma is a car crash. Because even after the event is finished, those two cars don't drive away and just like pop back into place like nothing ever happened. Trauma has an impact, the way it gets encoded in our bodies, in our nervous systems, how we relate to other people, how we relate to God. And so it takes some intentionality and care to heal some of those things. So if you've experienced trauma, if you're in relationship with people who've experienced trauma, we want to have a lot of compassion on what shaped how you show up now. But we also want to have hope that God uses people and the church to bring healing as well.
It just, very practically, occasionally sometimes people come up to me and they'll just be really struggling. Maybe it was with a death of a parent or a loved one, and they'll say something like, but Pastor Brian, it's been over a year. It's been over a year, and there's been time. Therefore, I should be better. And you go, well, but again, these experiences in life, I think the car crash is a good analogy. Like, unless you've done some body work, you're driving around a year later, you're still going to see the impact of it. And so how we process this and how we think about it. And I love that the hope in the fact that the family of God can become what the family of origin wasn't. That's a really important truth, that the family of God can become what the family of origin wasn't. And so whether it's kind of rewiring connections or relationships, teaching people what a healthy version should be, it has a major spiritual impact. So Jesus, in giving an illustration, says, which of you, when your child comes to ask you for a loaf of bread, is going to give them a snake? You remember this passage? And Jesus said, look, you being evil people, generally speaking, right, sinners, if you know how to give your kid a good gift, how much more your Father in heaven? So come and ask, pray. The hard challenge of that is, friends, some of you had a father who, when you asked for a loaf of bread, you got a snake. And what it does, theologically speaking, is it shapes our view of God, and it makes you hesitant. It makes you expect negative things. It makes you expect anger or whatever the response is, and so you pull back. Part of what Scripture is doing is presuming you've had a good example of this, but what if you didn't? Is there hope for you? That's why I love this quote that says, your history of connectedness is actually a better predictor of your health than your history of adversity. And that connectedness can be found here. And so very practically, if you guys had this big hole in your life in one area, I would encourage you to find a mentor or somebody who's wise here in this church who can go, can you kind of teach me what this looks like? Can we be in relationship and me experience what this kind of should have been, so that if I have kind of this adoptive dad who I get a little bit of an experience of what a good version of this like is, it's actually going to have a very profound spiritual impact in how I even approach my relationship with God and how I approach it with others. So this idea of walking with the wise, we are interdependent. Walk with the healthy, walk with the good dads, walk with the good sisters, and you're going to experience some change because of that. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think that was it. But I think you're the experts on you, right? You know your story. And so part of prioritizing your health is being really intentional with the kinds of people you seek out for those mismatching experiences. Because sometimes I think in churches we think, oh, I just need to learn about God and think differently. And that really matters, but so much was shaped implicitly through these relational experiences. We need new experiences to learn new things.
By the way, shout out to children's workers. This is why the unsung heroes of any church, anywhere in the world, any culture, any time, they're amazing. But this is why we tell our children's workers, beyond what we teach and the crafts and the games, we want kids to see a smile on our face. And for somebody to go, I'm so glad that you're here. It matters. It imprints something deep in the heart that says, whatever my week was, I remember at the church, I was loved. Those lessons are carried forward in life. And so if you see me high-fiving kids every Sunday, I do, and it is in part because I'm childish and I love children, but there's actually a deeper theology going on about how we want to care well for each other. What does it practically look like for the body to build itself up? Now let's talk about this next proverb here. This is probably the most famous proverb in the entire book. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. Let's talk about this verse in mental health.
I love these verses because it gives me an excuse to talk about anxiety, which is a passion of mine because I've had to do a lot of anxiety work personally. I work with a lot of anxious clients, and I think this verse is hugely helpful on this topic. So, a few thoughts about anxiety. Anxiety is the most common mental health disorder in the US. The estimate is about a third of adults at some point in their lives will experience an anxiety disorder. But when we think about anxiety, 100% of us have it, right? Like this is part of how we're wired, and it's not bad. Sometimes it's really helpful to maybe help you not procrastinate, right? It gives you some energy, or to maybe perform well, something like that. But when we think about anxiety disorders, it's when those symptoms are more intense and more enduring. So think like more than 6 months, that they are showing up consistently for more than 6 months. So things like phobias, an intense fear of something specific, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, things like that. So what's so interesting is it's not just that anxiety is really prevalent, not just in our country, but around the world. We were asked to talk in Rwanda about this, saying that, hey, we're seeing a rise in anxiety as well. But a lot of the research is showing that it is just a huge increase over the last couple decades, especially like Gen Z, sometimes it's called the anxious generation. There's just a lot more anxiety. So even though that's not good news, that there's so much more anxiety being felt, it is good news in that genes don't adapt that quickly. So it's not just that some people are born more anxious than others. There are things that we're doing that are increasing this collective sense of anxiety, which means there's things we can change to help it go down as well. Things like our relationship with our phones, that's not a popular one, our sleep, our social connection, like all kinds of things that we can do to help with anxiety. But a few thoughts about how I see anxiety. It's not just in your thoughts, it shows up in your body as well. Right? So it tends to be the thoughts over-anticipate the problem or the stressor, and they underestimate your own capacity to cope. If it happens, we think it's going to be so much worse than it really is. It tends to be thoughts about the future or the past. So our imagination imagines this future and then tries to think a way to prevent whatever bad from happening. If anyone's seen Inside Out 2, I love the way they illustrate this, by the way. Like hijacks your imagination to think of all these terrible things that could happen. Or we overthink the past, right? Did I say something stupid? Did they notice that I was uncomfortable? Things like that. Neither of which we can change, which is why grounding in the present can be so helpful for anxiety. Okay, so those are the types of thoughts. They tend to be intrusive thoughts, recurring thoughts, but also very physical symptoms. So some people with anxiety will experience that as like sweating, feeling dizzy, trembling, stuff like that, tension, heart rate going up, which leads us to then either avoid situations that we think will make us uncomfortable, which doesn't work, or we still go, but it's just really, really uncomfortable in the process. So all that to say, the reason why I love this proverb is that anxiety tends to lie to us thinking that the way to solve it is with certainty. I don't have to be anxious as soon as I know for sure that this isn't a problem, right? As once I get the answer, then I'll calm down. Right? Peace only comes after certainty. But the opposite of anxiety is not certainty. The spiritual antidote to anxiety is actually trust. So no matter what happens, I don't have to know for sure. If I know that God's there, he's sovereign, he cares about me, he's present. If I can practice trust in the Lord, that's actually a very calming thing. So some practical ways to maybe practice trust in the Lord is when you notice those anxious thought loops, to interrupt them and shift your focus. Choosing not to try to fix it yourself and then helping your body calm down I actually think is a very spiritual response to this. So that fight or flight response, one way to calm it down is to do the things that your body naturally does when you feel safe. Slow, deep breaths. Not the deer in the headlights, right? You soften your face, relax your muscles, notice your 5 senses in the here and now. So you can actually notice them and name them in your head of what are some things I'm seeing, what am I hearing, what am I smelling, maybe go get a drink, something like that. That can be a way to calm down your body. Another thing that I noticed today, so shout out to Stephanie for the worship set, was a lot of raising your hands. So I didn't say this first hour, but there's an imaginary prayer practice I like called hands up, hands down prayer. So it's not just thinking differently, but using our imaginations to shift our state. So you start with your hands facing down, and you imagine whatever that is that's stressing you out, you imagine handing it off to the Lord, and let it go, give it to him. And then you flip your hands up, and you imagine receiving whatever you need in that moment, right? So maybe it's reassurance of his presence, wisdom, peace. You can use your imagination to help with that, and to sense his presence. So that was a lot of thoughts about anxiety. Again, I'm trying to summarize, but I think that trust really is the solution for us. So practicing trust in those ways is really helpful.
And I like that, practicing interrupting the cycle and then reminding ourselves of truth. And here's kind of the kicker, because this makes it sound like, well, if I just do that once and I go, God, this is yours, then I'm done. And my day is great and I never think about it again. If that's you, amazing. But can I tell you what it is most of the time for me anyway? Then 30 seconds later it comes back up. And then it comes back up. And you kind of have to go through this process of interrupting the cycle, giving it over to God, and intentionally shifting our focus. We did this with Elijah when he was a real little kid, and he would have these big kind of emotions, didn't know what to do with. Sometimes the only way to break it, we would just give him a math problem. He'd just be in the middle of this big emotion. We'd give him a 7 plus 5. And it literally stops. And you go, oh, I'm interrupting. I'm now switching the hemisphere of my brain. I'm going into a logic mode. I'm trying to answer this. And okay, well, now that I've got your attention, let's calm down. Let's do this, right? Sometimes we need to do a little bit of that with ourselves as an adult. Break the cycle, remind ourselves of truths, give it to God, and repeat as kind of necessary. But here's the big idea I don't want us to miss. The solution to anxiety is not certainty. It is not certainty. And this is what people say when something bad happens in life. The number one question is, why? Because it's like our brains are starved for some sort of a way to conceive of this. But the solution to anxiety is actually not certainty. The opposite of anxiety is trust. And we may be in this place where we're overestimating the problem and we're underestimating our resources to deal with it. And we may not have even a great bead on reality depending on how we're feeling. But you know what's true as a believer? There is no problem so big that God cannot handle it. If God is for us, then who can be against us? So take it outside of yourself and your ability to respond. Whatever you think you might make the cut or not, we want to give it to God and go, but God, I know that you can. And Father, we trust that you will. And that is where we place our trust. All right, let's do one more real fast. This is related to boundaries, actually. And I'll just read the verses on the screen. You can look at the whole ones. Proverbs 23, verses 1 through 8. Boundaries was another one that came up. I just want to make a note of this because I love this. Here's what Proverbs 23 says. Some of these are from separate verses. But whenever you sit down with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Okay? That's the first one. Now look at this next one. Do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies. For he's like one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink, he says to you. but his heart is not with you. And the proverb goes on to say, even though you eat it and you enjoy it, you're going to end up throwing it up later. You're going to pay the cost. Let me talk about this, how this deals with mental health. All right, so let's go back to the first one. We talk about boundaries. Sometimes boundaries, there's a misnomer that we say, boundaries are me saying no. That's not actually what boundaries are. Boundaries are understanding where you end and another person begins. Where is my responsibility start and end? Where does your stuff start and end? That's actually what boundaries are. It's not just a no. And it works both ways, friends. The Bible encourages both ways. So let's think about this. Both scenarios, you're sitting down at a party and you stop eating all that you could. But these are for two very different reasons. So in the first scenario, you understand a little bit about yourself. You know your own proclivities, you know your own weaknesses. By the way, we all have them. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. And the Proverbs saying, look, if you're prone to like overeating, you're just so excited about it, you're gonna go back for that third plate, you're gonna go back to that fourth plate, it's not good for you, then let's put a knife to our own throat. All right, it's dramatic. Don't go to a dinner party and put a knife to your throat. You understand the point, right? It's supposed to be evocative. It's trying to get you to take it seriously, right? You need to think about what it's saying. If I know that I am prone to this, I'm gonna put some guardrails. Don't just show up to the thing and go, I'm sure we'll be okay. You need to be thoughtful and put your own awareness on, put some own kind of boundaries on this thing so that you will behave responsibly. Now look at the next one. Here's the second reason why you might not eat so much at a dinner party. This is not about you. This is about the person who's outside of yourself and kind of what's going on in them, which may not be good. In fact, in this instance, it's not. Here's a stingy person. You ever known somebody like this? They say, please go ahead and take some, and you know they're kind of resenting it when you do. Right? This is the proverb. Please keep eating the whole time. They're going, it went back for seconds for that. That was $6.95 for that. They're up to $2 now. We're up to $13. I haven't even calculated what the tax is on that. You know, and they're resenting what they're giving you, even though they're kind of presumably giving it with an open heart, right? You need to know whether another, what's their state? Are they a bad actor? Do they have good intention towards you? Do they not? I need to not overeat because of what it's going to cost me because of their stuff. I say this to say it. Where our boundaries are really matter. And sometimes in the church, we've given a flat message. I don't think it's intended to be wrong, but we give a flat message. We talk about God's love and forgiveness. It is amazing. The long suffering of God, the forgiveness of God, the graciousness of God. We want to be people who forgive. Well, how many times should I forgive? You forgive as many times as it takes. But occasionally, people conflate that with, well, then that means whoever was the offender, whoever might have been the abuser, they're just let back into my inner circle with no more boundaries, and I expose myself to harm again. I want to make the point, we need to be thoughtful about our own inner weaknesses. We need to be thoughtful about the tendencies of other people, and we need to put up some clear boundaries in that. Friends, forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. They're not the same. You can forgive somebody as Jesus forgave you, and you can not let them back around your inner circle because odds are they're going to hurt you again. That's wisdom. That's wisdom, right? For reconciliation to happen, we need to see a pattern of change behavior over time, not simply an apology and I feel bad right now. I love that. I'm thankful for that. That's a first step. But when we're talking about how we kind of live this out, where do I end in my responsibilities? Where do you start? And how am I thoughtful about that in both situations? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's a helpful discussion on boundaries because it often gets a bad rap of only the ability to say no. There is a protective element to it, right? We want to keep harm out, and I think that that's actually the most loving thing for the other person too. To enable someone to continue doing harm is not good for their soul either. So truth and love have to go together. Boundaries are really healthy. And it's about saying yes and no and being able to hear yes and no, right? So the good stuff that I have to offer, I need to be able to let it out to others, let others good in, but keep out the harm. Yeah.
Here, let's kind of wrap up with this. And as the worship team comes up, as we prepare to close, part of what we've been trying to illustrate throughout this entire series. In fact, the reason it was randomized and you didn't know what passage it was going to be or the topic it was going to be was actually intended to be a bit of a living illustration because wisdom is not just about knowing the exact right thing to do in any single moment. Wisdom, here's how we've defined it and how I think the book of Proverbs defines it. Wisdom is the ability to skillfully navigate the demands of life. And you don't know what life's going to bring up. It would be wonderful if we all knew, hey, in 2026, here's the opportunities I'm going to face, here's the challenges I'm going to face, here's the person I need to be a little cautious on or put a little distance with, here's the person I need to embrace. That'd be wonderful. Friends, it's not life. It's not life. In fact, life, unlike the game, does not come with an instruction booklet and doesn't tell you exactly where to land and how many spaces to go. You are invited to be a wise person. That whatever life brings this year, you're going to know how to respond with truth and with grace and in a way that honors God and is good for yourself and good for this world. In fact, the greatest gift that you can give yourself this year is becoming a wise person, not just a person who knows a few wise things. So we've been practicing that throughout this entire series, trying to get you to think a little bit more deeply, a little bit more broadly. How do we interact with all these topics? So now it's your turn, okay? I've been illustrating this week after week for you. I want you to actually practice it. School's probably canceled tomorrow anyway, so you know, if you got kids, you got time off tomorrow. It's your turn. Here are 4 Proverbs that I want you to look at, read. If you're in a small group, a community group, maybe do this in your group. If you're not, you should try getting in a small group, okay? There's a lot launching. We want you to be connected and involved. But this is a great way. We've picked some Proverbs for you to read. And again, they're a little opaque. That's a feature, not a bug, because it has to make you stop and think and go, what does this actually mean for me and my life? And practice deepening your own wisdom. So try it with these Proverbs. Talk about with your community and see what it looks like to continue following down this path of wisdom that begins with the fear of the Lord and that leads to a life that God has designed for you. That's my heart for myself. Friends, it's my heart for you as well. Father in heaven, would you teach us to be wise? Father, may we know you, may we know your word, and may it be translated, metabolized through our souls in such a way that we're living as these people who know what to do, the right thing at the right time to the right degree. And Father, as we march from wherever we're starting today to that place, would you give us grace? God, teach us to be people who read your word, to respond to it, who are living lives that are being these examples of Christ's likeness to everyone around us. And Father, would you bless each and every journey this year for your honor, for your glory, and God, we ultimately believe for our good. We ask this in the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, amen.